From parish priest in Ballarat to third in charge at the Vatican, George Pell's rise through the Catholic hierarchy has been impressive. But he's been dogged every step of the way by what he knew and what he did about the sexual abuse of children at the hands of pedophile priests. If it wasn't for Richard Carlton's interview with the Cardinal on 60 Minutes in 2002, he might just have been believable. But he's since appeared to be a liar and someone willing to go to great lengths to protect his own reputation. And tonight, damning evidence against the Cardinal. You see, George Pell has always argued his Melbourne response for child abuse victims was innovative, independent and compassionate. But now, secret documents reveal it as a cynical smokescreen designed to protect the church at all costs.
We thought we were all happy days back then.
Yeah.
These are bittersweet moments for Anthony and Chrissy Foster.
Look at Emma here.
Photo albums are the only way they get to see their beloved daughter, Emma.
School photo of Emma? Can you?
8 years ago, she took her own life, unable to deal with the trauma of childhood sexual abuse by her school priest, Kevin O'Donnell.
School, wasn't it? That was special.
I remember that.
And look at the...
Emma's younger sister, Katie, was also abused by the same priest. She tried to obliterate her pain through binge drinking. One day, drunk, she wandered into the path of an oncoming car and now needs 24-hour care.
Emma, First Communion.
Emma's First Communion.
The Sacred Heart Primary School here in Melbourne is where Anthony and Chrissy thought their daughters would be safest. How wrong they were.
So behind this wall is the room where Emma was assaulted. That window is the window in the room where O'Donnell raped her. And that's where it all happened.
When they first discovered Emma had been raped by O'Donnell, Anthony and Chrissy demanded a meeting with then Archbishop of Melbourne, George Pell. It took place in this very presbytery beside the school, where the pedophile priest would also abuse his victims. But according to the Fosters, Pell couldn't have been less interested.
His words were, if you don't like what we're doing, take us to court.
Did you think at this point we're going to have a fight on our hands?
We were ready to fight because I already knew what the church was like and what they'd already done to victims. So we were in fight mode for sure, and that did not help at all.
In 2002, disguised for the cameras, Anthony and Chrissy first told 60 Minutes of their meeting with Pell.
We showed Pell a photo of him presenting our daughter with a confirmation certificate. His response was, "That's a very nice photo, that's lovely."
In all the years since, their account has never changed.
I showed a photo with him handing Emma a certificate. And his comment was, "That's a nice photo." I showed him a photo of Emma having cut her wrists with a bottle, and he said, "Oh, she's changed, hasn't she?"
I've never seen the photo
with a slashed wrist.
With a slashed wrist.
Mother and father say they gave it to you.
Well, I don't believe I've seen. I've got no recollection of that.
Pell's denial to Richard Carlton would haunt him as the lie it was, when it was made clear a decade later at the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry that Pell had in fact seen the Fosters' photo.
When Chrissy and Anthony Foster showed you a photograph after their daughter Emma had slashed her wrist, did you respond, and again I quote, "She's changed, hasn't she?"
Probably, but you've got to understand that this was production of this photo was something sudden. I didn't have a chance for a considered response.
This casual but extraordinary change in Pell's story was a bombshell admission. After all those years of denial, he had seen the Fosters' photo.
At 9 a.m. on the 2nd of February 1993, I rang George from my home in Bentley. My partner at the time was sitting in the room when I made the call.
David Ridsdale is another witness before this ongoing Royal Commission. He's returning from the UK, where he currently lives, to again take the stand next week.
I get people trying to say to me it was a different time, people didn't know how to respond, and the simple truth is it was never a good time to rape children.
For 20 years, David has said George Pell offered him a bribe to stay silent about the abuse by his uncle and priest, Gerald Ridsdale, as he told Richard Carlton in 2002.
And his response to that was, I want to know what it will take to keep you quiet.
You said, so it is alleged, I want to know what it would take to keep you quiet.
No, I certainly would never have said that, and I didn't say that. And I deeply regret that he misunderstood things in these ways. And before today, I'd never heard a suggestion that he'd put that interpretation on it. He'd never said that to me.
David first went to George Pell because he was a family friend. If Cardinal Pell claims that there was a misunderstanding between you and he over you going to him for help, in the years since, has he ever tried to clear that up? Has he?
No, never. And, you know, the Commission is about institutional response, and he has had more than ample opportunity to respond and has never made any effort.
As one of Gerald Ridsdale's victims, David's return to his childhood town of Ballarat is not an easy thing to do. What does this school represent to you and lots of other people like you, David?
This is a house of horror. And the men I've met that went to this school all suffer similar symptoms, similar fears and similar nightmares.
And they're the ones who are still alive today?
The ones that are alive. There's a lot of people who went to this school are no longer alive.
But despite the risk of adding to David's trauma, Cardinal Pell has instructed his lawyers to have him recalled to be cross-examined at the Royal Commission next week.
The Church promised, that they wouldn't do this to us. It feels like an attack. It is what it does feel like.
From the start of the Royal Commission, the Church's stated attitude has been not to cross-examine abuse victims and survivors out of a sense of compassion. But George Pell is set to defy his church community by recalling those who've given testimony against him. When it comes to defending his own reputation, it seems compassion no longer counts.
And the fact that the only people being called back are ones who have said anything about George Pell suggests that he's keener to protect himself than moving forward on this process.
This isn't just an Australian issue, this is a global issue for the Church, and I think Francis recognises that.
Were you surprised that he agreed to come?
I think...
Peter Saunders is an abuse survivor, appointed by the Pope to sit on the Vatican's own Child Abuse Commission. He's here as the eyes of the Catholic world are on Australia and our Royal Commission.
I've been to the Royal Commission and they seem to be extremely determined to get to the heart and to the root and to the truth of these dreadful atrocities that have been committed in this country. So I think we're in monumental times, actually.
Peter's main focus in Australia is studying the Royal Commission's revelations about what's known as the Melbourne response, the process then Archbishop George Pell set up to help victims of church abuse.
The Catholic Church has taken some time to come to grips.
For 2 decades, Pell has proudly claimed his Melbourne response was a world first in assisting and compensating victims. In fact, it is anything but.
The Melbourne response was and is a cynical attempt, again, to denigrate, to silence, to intimidate families who are grieving, families who are hurting.
Coming up, many victims going through George Pell's Melbourne response knew it was seriously flawed, knew something was wrong, but they couldn't have known of the duplicity working against them until now. George Pell has always claimed credit that as Archbishop of Melbourne, he was one of the first in the Catholic world to recognise and investigate the heinous crimes being committed by priests, and one of the first to provide aid and care to victims and their families. His Melbourne response would be, he promised, completely independent of the Church, to investigate, compensate and care for victims. But as you'll see through documents uncovered by the Royal Commission, George Pell's so-called independent response was in fact in the pay of the Church, reported to the Church and acted in the Church's best interests.
The Melbourne response was set up by George Pell in order to save the Catholic Church money. It was supposedly set up to look after victims, and in fact, it was just a sham.
The whole thing is exposing it so that the general public can see how this happened, you know, when it happened and why it happened.
Chrissy and Anthony Foster, whose daughters were raped by a pedophile priest, always felt their treatment by George Pell's Melbourne response was heartless. Now, some 20 years later, and thanks to these never-before-published documents, they have proof. With them is one of Pope Francis's commissioners on child abuse, Peter Saunders.
You know, nobody wants to acknowledge what some adults do to children.
One of George Pell's key appointees to the Melbourne response was psychiatrist Richard Ball. His job to assess and treat victims, including Emma and Katie Foster. But shockingly, this was a man who was also the go-to expert witness used by lawyers to defend pedophile priests, including the very same priest who raped Emma and Katie, Kevin O'Donnell.
No victim would want to talk to him. Any victim who is sitting in front of a psychiatrist who also had that victim's perpetrator as a client would be horrified at that. That just is wrong. It is wrong.
At the time, the Fosters were told they were overreacting, and in response to their complaints about Richard Ball, George Pell wrote,
"I have absolute confidence in Professor Ball."
But what we can reveal tonight is how Pell's man, Richard Ball, actively and cynically helped pedophile priest Kevin O'Donnell minimise his jail term. In a secret letter to O'Donnell's lawyer, Professor Ball began,
"This is not, repeat not, the letter which you wanted."
In this letter, Ball makes it clear he has examined O'Donnell's background and the nature of his offences, committed over 50 years, and more, that O'Donnell has admitted abusing children
Until 3 or 4 years ago, sometimes going on for a reasonably lengthy time with particular individuals.
Incredibly, he then wrote this second letter on the same day, but this one for the judge who would be sentencing O'Donnell. Now directly contradicting his secret letter, Professor Ball says,
"I've had insufficient time to carry out a formal and detailed assessment. Suffice it to say that at present Father O'Donnell has little or no libido, and there are no inclinations, much less opportunity, to offend again."
And critically, Professor Ball completely fails to tell the judge that O'Donnell had admitted he'd been offending until recently, leaving the judge no choice but to believe the pedophile's lie that he'd stopped abusing children some 18 years before.
"It is of great significance in your favour that you have not offended against the law over those past 18 years.
In the sentencing transcript, the judge said he used that to make his sentence. So it was false information.
Because in contrast, what was he saying in his secret report?
That O'Donnell had offended right up to 1992 or 93 instead of 1977.
And that was by O'Donnell's own admission to the psychiatrist.
O'Donnell could have faced 86 years in jail, but instead was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months. He served just 2 years. He died in 1997, a free man. Anthony and Chrissy Foster knew instinctively that Richard Ball represented a conflict of interest, but they could never guess how serious that conflict was until they saw the proof in his two reports, his secret and his sanitised assessments of the offending priest, O'Donnell. But it didn't stop there. Professor Ball was also an expert witness for many other pedophile priests, and shockingly, for Australia's worst, Gerald Ridsdale, he said he didn't believe Ridsdale would benefit from going to jail. In fact, showing extraordinary concern for the offender, Professor Ball said if Ridsdale was sent to prison, he might be exploited by homosexuals there. But for you to hear that about your uncle, that this man who abuses at every opportunity shouldn't be in jail.
I can't explain their behaviours.
For David Ridsdale, a victim of his uncle Gerald Ridsdale, being assessed by Richard Ball was just another form of abuse.
He was one of the people that saw me, and for the church, and the experience made it clear, you know, he was there to prove me wrong. That's what he was there for.
George Pell's other main appointee on the Melbourne response was Victorian QC Peter O'Callaghan. His job was to assess if the abuse took place. Again, just like psychiatrist Ball, Peter O'Callaghan was meant to be independent of the church, something George Pell seemed particularly proud of back in 2002.
We have processes set up, and people are free to use them, people are using them, and we will follow them scrupulously.
What no one knew, least of all the victims, was that both so-called independent appointees were instructed by and reported to the church's long-standing law firm, represented by Richard Leader.
He was the instructing solicitor to the independent commissioner.
Well, how could the commissioner be described as independent
He
then?
couldn't be. It's very simple, he couldn't be. And from that, there's a great potential for conflict of interest. It wasn't set up as a response to help victims. Its primary purpose was set up to avoid scandal and reduce the cost to the church.
It's clear, in document after document, the Fosters are denigrated by the very people George Pell set up to help them. This from Commissioner Peter O'Callaghan to the church's lawyer, Richard Leader.
Dear Richard, I would like your views as to whether it is appropriate to, in effect, try to flush out the real intentions of the Fosters.
At the time, all levels of the process were driven by suspicion, not sympathy.
Superimposed over all this is the real question mark as to whether, in fact, Emma was abused by O'Donnell. There are some elements of "we protest too much."
And finally, from psychiatrist Richard Ball to Commissioner O'Callaghan.
A girl like Emma could cost millions.
And that's something which really shocked us and makes us know that the church knew the sort of damage that had been done to her.
Each day, the Royal Commission uncovers more damning evidence that the church has been out to protect itself, whether it's the way it treats its victims or how it covers for perpetrators.
For me, the vilest crime on the planet is the assault, the rape of a child. A very close second is to witness it and to do nothing.
As Australia's highest-ranking clergyman, George Pell not only continues to trumpet his now discredited Melbourne response, he also continues to deny knowing anything about the church cover-up of pedophile priests. And that's despite a career that's put him at the heart of where the worst of these crimes have occurred, including Ballarat. What sort of reception would you expect George Pell might get if he walked down the streets of Ballarat today?
He wouldn't be able to. He would not be able to physically make it to the end of the street. There is too much anger.
In 10 days' time, the eyes of Ballarat and Australia will be on the Cardinal when he again takes the stand at the Royal Commission. So as George Pell prepares to come and appear before this Royal Commission, does he do so with fear? Does he do so with arrogance? Does he do so with humility?
I'd almost certainly say without humility. I don't think that's in any shape or form within his character. I think there are some extremely serious questions to be asked. Whether we will get answers to some of the questions we think should be asked is yet to be seen. We look forward to it.
Hello, I'm Tara Brown. Thanks for watching. To keep up with the latest from 60 Minutes Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel. You can also download the 9Now app for full episodes and other exclusive 60 Minutes content.